You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp, put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. As Jesus continues through his Sermon on the Mount, we arrive at that passage, Matthew 5, verses 14 through 16. And he again is stressing why the changes that he's talking about are so important. We looked through those Beatitudes. We looked at the path that he's taking us on from recognizing our poor in spirit, our need for him, bringing us all the way through that until we are that pure in heart, righteous before God. We finished last week talking about being the salt of the earth. We talked about how salt has those healing qualities. It has preserving qualities. It adds flavor when used correctly, and a lot of other things. And as Christians, we have that intention, or God has that intention for us, to provide some of those same things, to be a healing for those around us, to be that which helps to preserve those around us, to add a little better flavor to the world when we look at it and think it's going totally the wrong way. This week, he tells them, you're the light of the world. Have you ever been out more in the country, the rural areas at night, especially a moonless night? Real dark. And you can look up, and on the horizon you see just a glow of light. Even a little town like Williston, you can get out Morriston area, go out Goethe State Forest area, look back this direction, and you'll see the glow of the lights from the city. That's the picture Jesus is giving them. He says it's sitting up on a hill. It's even higher, more visible. Now imagine that you are someone who you're out in that more desert area and you get lost. And as daylight fades and you're not sure where you're at and darkness begins to settle in around you and begins to get darker, imagine finally being able to look around you and see the light from the city that's on the hill. To know, okay, I might not know exactly where I'm at, but at least I know where I need to head to get to safety. There may be nothing else around, but I know where there's lights, there's people. Where there's lights, there is some form of safety for me, some form of refinding my bearings and finding my way. Jesus says that's the role we're to play. We live in the midst of a world that is lost. Some of them know it, some of them don't. There are various stages of the daylight, various stages of the dark, where it is crushing in and getting darker and darker and darker. And if we're not going to let a light shine on the hill, for them to be able to see, here's where the safety is. Here's where we can go to find a way of escape. And we're going to miss our role as Christians. The purpose of the light is to be seen. It's a role that at times we relish. We want to be seen. We want to have that spotlight on us. And then there's other times where we have the exact opposite feeling, don't we? I kind of like to disappear. I don't want people looking at me. I don't want people associating me with that at the moment, or all sorts of other reasons, and we'll deal with some of those in a moment. Jesus is reminding them, Israel, you were supposed to be the light. You were supposed to be God's chosen people. You were the ones that he had set up his covenant with. You were the ones that were supposed to show the rest of the world how great it could be to walk with the one true God, so that they desired what you had, so that they wanted to come towards that. And his message to them was, you're failing in that. You have not been that light. The church today, I'm afraid, finds itself becoming very similar to the Israel that Jesus came to. To the ones that he was speaking to that day, where we have times where we want to shine our light just as bright. We want people to look at us and say, look how good they are, look how righteous they are. And other times, well, we don't want to get involved in that topic. So we're just going to be quiet. We're just going to step away. We're not going to shine what God's light says about that. Jesus is reminding them, and he's reminding us, you can't have it both ways. Either we are the light of the world, or there's a problem. So where does this light that we're talking about, where does that come from? Where do we find that if we're going to begin thinking of ourselves in terms of being the light of the world? Later on in the Sermon on the Mount, we get to Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 and 23. Jesus again brings out this analogy of the light. And he says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? The point Jesus is trying to make there is, if our focus, the greater context of that passage is, determine what's important to you. What treasures are you seeking? Where are you going to put your trust? Where are you going to put your faith? What is going to be valuable to you? And so he says, whatever the focus of your eyes are, that's what's determining the light that's coming from you. The obvious nature of the context there is, if I'm looking towards God, if I'm looking towards Christ, then I am putting something wholesome in me, something that brings this light out that can shine brighter and brighter, that is supposed to, as Jesus said about himself, supposed to draw all men to him when he's lifted up. But he makes the opposite point there as well. If our focus is on that which is something other than godly things, if it's something other than that which is righteous, if it's something other than that which is healthy for us, he still describes it as being filled with a light, but it's a light of darkness. We don't necessarily think of light being in those terms. The reality is we're going to shine a light. It's what light are we shining? Are we shining the light of hope? Are we shining the light of righteousness? Are we shining a bright light that is the beacon that says, here is where God is at and where you can find hope and security, where you can find peace and comfort? Or is it something darker that may or may not be so peaceful, may or may not be so secure, may or may not be the place that you really want to go? I can remember, I guess it was 1989, my first term in college. I was working with the college's basketball team, and we went to New Orleans. And we were down for a basketball game, and we were getting a tour of the Superdome. And then they let us get to go out and see Bourbon Street and experience the town. There were a lot of well-lit places. You were smart if you stayed in well-lit places. There were a lot of places, though, that they had some light, just enough to try to draw you in. Not enough light to keep you safe. Not enough that you could tell what was going on. And they warned us before we ever got off of the bus, take your wallets and put them in your shoes, because they'll walk along behind you, slice the bottom of your pocket, wait till your wallet falls out the bottom, they'll pick it up and be gone. You'll never know it's happened. I saw things there that they weren't healthy for the eyes. And our lives are going to reflect one or the other, or some variation in between. And Jesus is calling us to say, this is the type of light you are supposed to be. But you're going to have to find what's important to you. You're going to have to find that which is going to give you the right type of light to be shining forth. Do we get to determine what light we reflect? We get to determine how bright it's going to be and who's going to be able to see it. And so we begin thinking about choosing that light source. Excuse me. John chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. This is in the midst of a passage that we looked at a good deal as we closed out last year and started out this year in some sermons. John chapter 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You know, all of that passage about Jesus and his coming to earth. John states it this way, verse 4. In him was life, and that life was the light of mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There's the true source of life. There's the true source of light. The two work hand in hand. Jesus, as you go through the New Testament scriptures, through the gospel accounts, he gives us a lot of I am statements. I am the way, the truth, and the life. He says, I am the light of the world. The two become interchangeable because they're both linked to Jesus. We celebrated this morning around the Lord's table what Jesus did for us in going to the cross and in his resurrection, because that is the source of the true life that is the everlasting life for us. It is the saving of our souls. It is what brings us to the light that has life and safety and security and comfort and all of those things. So as I begin thinking, that's where my treasure is. That's where what is important. And most of us, if we're listing things that are important to us, our life is one of those very first things that we list, isn't it? We may not always like our life, but it's important to us because we want to preserve it. We want to protect it. So if that's what I'm searching for Christ. Paul says it this way, Galatians 2 and verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The light lives in me. The life lives in me. And the life that I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. The light that I'm supposed to be, as I become that city on a hill Jesus is talking about, as I become the lamp that is lit and set up in the lampstand so that it gives light to all the room and to everyone about me. That light is not Daniel. The reality is Daniel in and of himself will never be enough to be that bright of a light. It'll never be the light that offers the kind of life and the kind of hope and the kind of security that Christ offers. That's Daniel by himself. But Daniel, with Christ living in him, people can begin to see that. They can begin to see something more than who Daniel by himself is. I'm using my name there. Take my name out and put yours in. The reality is the same. That's where Jesus has walked us, poor in spirit, recognizing I'm sinful. I need Christ. I'm lost without him. I mourn over that. I become meek and submissive to him, humbling myself before him. I begin to hunger and thirst for righteousness, and I find myself filled with it as I become pure in heart. The journey Christ is walking on us from my priorities were in all the wrong places to the things that made me a dark light, that kept me from being a source of hope for anybody, to being a source that is a beacon of the hope of Christ. And he calls us to choose that. Paul shows us that. Romans chapter 13, verse 11 through 14. Paul says, and do this understanding the present time. The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. Let me pause there for just a second. We look at the world around us today. I said earlier, it's getting darker and darker. We're concerned as Christians about the trajectory of our country, about the morality of our country. We see things getting worse and worse, more out in the open. That's not a new thought for Christians. Paul just said the same thing. Understand our present time. Understand things are not going well. Things are not what God intended. And it's time for us to wake up and do something about it. Because we are closer to the time of the next coming of Christ than we were yesterday. And we've been almost 2,000 years since Paul wrote that. It's still true. We're still a day closer than we were yesterday. Many during that 2,000 years have gone on to their salvation, even though Jesus hasn't come back yet, because their time has come to a close. So Paul says, understand where you're at. Understand the time that you live in. The hour has come. Wake up from your slumber. Your salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us behave decently, as in the daytime, not in carousing and drunkenness, and not in sexual immorality, not in debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy, but rather clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ. And do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. Paul's saying, choose your light. Choose what your eyes are going to be focused on. What is going to be that which is valuable to you? What is going to be that which is in front of you? That which you seek. He says, choose the armor of light. Choose Christ. Clothe yourself with him. Put on his way of thinking, his way of living, his way of living before others. Not about how to gratify the flesh. So that's the light that we're supposed to be choosing. It's there, it's available for us, and yet we have this struggle that we all face. We struggle to let the light shine all the time. I said earlier, sometimes we want to be seen as the spotlight. Other times we just want to shrink away and get over in the corner and nobody even know we're there. Sometimes that's because of a struggle with past weaknesses, with habits that we find difficult to get rid of, things that are part of that former way of life before we got our values and our priorities and before we got Christ right in our lives. And we still struggle with those things. Sometimes it's because I want to pick and choose who I let my light shine to. Whether because I've made some sort of judgment and they're not worthy of seeing the light, let them stay lost, or whether it's, I just don't want them to know I'm a Christian. I don't want them to know that I think that way or whatever. We talked about being peacemakers and how some people want to be peacemakers at all costs. They'll do anything and say anything and appear any way for the sake of avoiding confrontation. Sometimes that's why we don't want people to know we're Christians. It's easier to avoid that confrontation. But sometimes the struggle is also because we underestimate the lure of darkness. We put ourselves in situations thinking that our hold on the light is strong enough to drive back the darkness, and it's only when we step too far in there that we find out we didn't have as good a hold on the light as we thought we did. I don't have as much of the armor on as I needed to be able to step back into that situation. Sometimes that's because we don't realize Satan's a liar. And he can make the darkness look much better than it is. Some of you may be Star Wars fans. The whole theme of the movies light versus dark side, good side versus evil side. But throughout all of it, what is it that's drawing people away from the light? Because supposedly the dark side has something to offer that the light doesn't. That draws Anakin away was the thought, I can bring somebody back from the dead, but I can only do it through the dark side. Satan can make things look really, really good. There'll be 100 ads on TV today making things that are not good for the eyes, that are not good for building our light and projecting our light. And they're not going to look like some seedy, dark backroom alley. They're going to look good. They're going to look pleasing. They're going to look like something that, hey man, I can go into that and I can have a lot of fun and life will be great. And it's a lie. And so we struggle with those things. And if we're going to overcome those struggles, it has to begin in our mindset. I've got to determine in my mind that the light is not something that is to be put on at will and removed at will. If I'm going to be the light of Christ shining in this world, then I've got to be determined to be the light of Christ shining into this world. I'm not going to be it today and think tomorrow I can take the day off. Imagine through the years if the lighthouses along the coast had said, I'm going to shine our light tonight and warn people, but tomorrow night I just don't think we'll man the lights. How many ships would have been wrecked? How many people would have been lost? If you're going to run a lighthouse, you've got to run a lighthouse. It's got to be on. Sometimes even in the daylight, when storms come in and it gets dark because of the storm, you've got to go up and you've got to man the light. As Christians, we have got to get that mindset. This is not going to be something that I'm going to put on and take off at will. I'm going to let that light shine. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, people don't light a lamp and then put it under a bowl. The reason you put it under a bowl, it snuffs it out. It doesn't just block the light. It may be a temporary block. You could put the bowl over it and you could take it back off for a second. That light might still be going. But you put that over an open flame candle and just let it sit there for very long. It'll run out of air. It'll snuff out that light. And something's got to come along and relight it or it's done. And that's what happens to us when we fall into this thought of, I can be the light sometimes and I can turn it off sometimes. Every time that we cover it up, every time that we turn it off, it becomes easier to leave that cover there just a little bit longer. I don't know how many of you may have seen the old movie Flatliners. It was the story of a group of student doctors who set up their own little lab on the side to practice and do. And they started, for lack of a better way of saying it, killing themselves. And they would do whatever it was. I forget now what the thing was. They would do something to stop their heart. And their partners were supposed to wait longer and longer before doing the resuscitation to bring them back. See, how long can we go it still brings somebody back. And each one tried to re-up the other. I can stay dead longer than you can and still come back. I don't recommend the movie, but it makes this point. The more we cover the light of Christ in our life, the closer and closer we get to that point where we don't come back. Paul said there in Romans 13, verse 12, put on the armor of light. Armor has to be worn the entire time that you are in a war zone. Our soldiers live in their body armor. The only time it comes off is in the relative safety of their barracks for about the length of time to get a bath when they're in a real war zone. The rest of the time, they may change the clothes that's under the armor, but the armor is on because the danger is always there. The reality is we are in a war zone. It is a battleground between good and evil. It is a battleground between Satan and God. Paul gives us a lot of other descriptions of the armor of faith, how it protects us and how it works and does. In this case, he gives it this description of the armor of light because despite wearing armor in a battle zone, we've got to let a light shine. Put on Christ and leave him on. Immerse yourself more and more into him so that your light becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So that more people see it. So more people are drawn to it. So that more people can hopefully find the God that we serve and what he's trying to do in their lives. We need to do that through prayer. We need to do it through study. And we need to do it through practice. Lesson's yours. My time's up. When we leave here today, we're not walking out of a safe spot. I just want you to know that. Well, I said we are in a war zone. The war zone includes where we're at right now. We might think there's magical barriers that God has that keep Satan from coming into church buildings. There are churches around the world today where Satan is there telling lies. Because Christians are not keeping our focus on Christ. We're not keeping our minds set on the danger that we face. As we leave here today, leave out of here committed to putting on the armor that God's given you. Leave here committed to being immersed in Christ and letting your light begin to really shine. If there's something that we can do this morning to assist you in that process, let us know as we stand together and sing. Cleansing.